New Guinea, 1943. Private first class. Raymond Cole hadn't eaten a real meal in 11 days. He was lying in a jungle foxhole, soaking wet, shaking from malaria fever. His boots had rotted off his feet. 3 men in his unit had died that week, not from bullets, from disease, from starvation, from being forgotten. He could barely hold a pen, but he wrote a letter anyway. He didn't write to his mother. He didn't write to his wife. He wrote to General Douglas MacArthur. In the letter, he described what his unit was eating: bark, insects, whatever they could find in the mud. He described men too weak to lift their rifles. He described a sergeant who cried in the dark because he hadn't slept in 4 days. He described the smell of the jungle, rot, sweat, infection, and how that smell had become so normal that nobody noticed it anymore. Then he described something else. 12 miles behind the front line, there was a building, a large building, a converted plantation house surrounded by generators and radio equipment. Inside that building, American officers were sitting at long tables covered in white cloth. Real food, hot food, wine, the smell of cigarettes and laughter drifting out into the jungle night, while men at the front ate mud and prayed for morning. Cole had seen it with his own eyes during a supply run. He had stood at the edge of the tree line, filthy and hollow-eyed, and watched through the window as a colonel cut into a piece of meat. He stood there for a long time. Then he went back to his foxhole and wrote the letter. One sentence at the end of that letter would change everything. "General, I don't know what we're fighting for anymore, because whatever it isn't being shared equally." The letter reached MacArthur's desk on a Tuesday morning. His aide almost didn't pass it up the chain. It was, technically, a violation of protocol. Enlisted men didn't write directly to supreme commanders. There were channels, there were forms, there were proper ways to file a complaint, and none of them involved a handwritten letter from a malaria-ridden private in a jungle foxhole. But something about it made the aide pause. Maybe it was the handwriting, shaky, uneven, clearly written by someone running on nothing. Maybe it was the smell of the paper, damp, earthy, real. He passed it up. MacArthur read it once, then he read it again, then he set it down on his desk and sat very still for a long moment. His chief of staff, Brigadier General Richard Marshall, was in the room. He watched MacArthur's face and said nothing. He had worked with MacArthur long enough to know what that stillness meant. It didn't mean calm. It meant the opposite. MacArthur picked up the letter a third time, read the final sentence again, then looked at Marshall. "Get me the name of every officer assigned to the Port Moresby Rear Command Station. Every single one. Rank, posting, length of assignment. I want it on my desk in 1 hour." Marshall left the room immediately. The Rear Command Station had been established 8 months earlier as a logistics coordination hub. In theory, it existed to manage supply lines, coordinate air support, and maintain communication between forward units and headquarters. In theory. In practice, it had become something else entirely. Colonel William Stanton had been its commanding officer for 6 of those 8 months. He was 44 years old, a career officer who had spent most of the war navigating the political geography of high command rather than actual geography. He was good at paperwork. He was good at meetings. He was good at making himself indispensable to people who mattered while staying far away from people who were dying. Under his command, the station had expanded steadily. More staff, more equipment, better quarters. A cook had been requisitioned from a naval vessel docked at Port Moresby, then a second cook. Supplies intended for forward distribution had a habit of arriving at the station first, and sometimes not leaving. Nobody had formally complained. The men at the front didn't know who to complain to. The men at the station didn't see anything worth complaining about. It was, by the standards of rear echelon comfort, unremarkable. Officers had always taken care of themselves. That was how it worked. That was how it had always worked. That was the assumption Colonel Stanton was operating under on the Wednesday morning when he heard the sound of jeeps pulling up outside. He looked out the window. 4 jeeps, military police in the first and last, and in the middle jeep, standing rather than sitting, one hand resting on the windshield frame, 4 stars on his collar, was General Douglas MacArthur. Stanton had enough time to straighten his uniform before the door opened. MacArthur didn't knock. He walked through the front door of the plantation house, stopped in the center of the main room, and looked around slowly. Long tables, white cloth, a sideboard along the wall with covered dishes still holding the remnants of breakfast, electric lighting powered by the generator humming outside, ceiling fans turning lazily overhead. He stood there for almost 30 seconds without speaking. The officers in the room had come to attention the moment he entered. 8 of them, various ranks, all staring straight ahead, all beginning to understand that something had gone very wrong. MacArthur walked to the nearest table. He picked up a fork, set it down, picked up a glass, still holding a small amount of orange juice, real orange juice, not powdered, and looked at it. Then he set the glass down very carefully and turned to face the room. His voice, when he finally spoke, was quiet, almost conversational. That was the thing about MacArthur that people who hadn't encountered him before always got wrong. They expected volume. They expected the theatrical rage of a man performing anger. What they got instead was something colder. I want every man in this building assembled in the courtyard in 5 minutes. Every cook, every aide, every clerk, everyone. They assembled in the courtyard. 18 men total, officers and enlisted staff, standing in the humid New Guinea morning, sweat already forming on their collars. MacArthur walked out and stood in front of them. He looked at them the way a man looks at something he is trying to understand. Not with rage, with a kind of focused clinical examination, as if he were calculating something. Then he began to speak. 12 miles from where you are standing right now, there are American soldiers who have not had a hot meal in 2 weeks. There are men with malaria who are still holding their positions because there is nobody to relieve them. There are men who are eating whatever the jungle provides because the supplies that were allocated to them did not reach them. He paused. I have spent the last 18 hours reviewing your requisition records, your supply logs, your distribution reports. Another pause, longer this time. The numbers are very interesting. Colonel Stanton opened his mouth. MacArthur looked at him, and Stanton closed it again. I am not here to debate the numbers with you, Colonel. The numbers speak for themselves. What I am here to tell you is what happens next. He turned slightly, addressing all of them. Effective immediately, this station's supply allocation is reduced to field ration standard, same as the men at the front. No exceptions. The cook returns to Naval Command today. The generator fuel allocation is cut by 60%. Enough for communications equipment only. The rest goes forward. He let that settle. Colonel Stanton, you are relieved of command of this station. You will report to my headquarters at 800 tomorrow morning, where you will receive your new assignment. Stanton's face had gone pale. Sir, I would like the opportunity to explain. I know what you would like, Colonel. MacArthur's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. What you would like is irrelevant. What is relevant is this. He reached into his jacket and produced a single, folded piece of paper. He held it up so the assembled men could see it, though they were too far away to read it. A private first class with malaria wrote me a letter from a foxhole. He couldn't eat. He couldn't sleep. He could barely hold a pen. But he held one anyway because he still believed that someone in command was paying attention. He folded the letter and put it back in his jacket. He was right. Someone was. Dismissed. Colonel Stanton's new assignment was not what he had hoped for. MacArthur reassigned him to a forward logistics post in the Markham Valley, close enough to the front line that he could hear artillery on clear nights. No white tablecloths, no second cook, no ceiling fans. Stanton served out the rest of the war there. He never complained, at least not officially. He understood, with the particular clarity that comes from humiliation, that complaining would be unwise. The other officers at the station were reassigned individually, each to postings that placed them closer to the realities they had been successfully avoiding. The supplies that had been accumulating at the rear station were redirected forward within 48 hours. Medical supplies, rations, ammunition, equipment that men at the front had been requesting for weeks through proper channels and receiving nothing. Private First Class Raymond Cole received his unit's resupply on a Thursday afternoon. He didn't know why it had suddenly arrived. He didn't know about the letter's journey, about MacArthur's visit, about the courtyard assembly. He just knew that there was food, real food. He sat in his foxhole and ate slowly because eating too fast after starvation makes a man sick, and he had learned that the hard way. Around him, his unit ate in silence. Not the silence of despair, a different kind of silence. The silence of men who had been remembered. MacArthur never publicized what he had done. There was no press release, no formal announcement. The military record noted only that Colonel Stanton had been reassigned for administrative reasons. But the story moved through the ranks the way all true stories move, person to person, quietly, with the particular weight of something that actually happened. Soldiers who had never met MacArthur, who had only seen him in photographs, who knew him only as a distant authority, began to understand something about him that his official biography would never fully capture. He read the letters. All of them. Years later, a journalist asked one of the men who had been at the rear station that morning what MacArthur had been like in person. The officer, by then retired, living quietly in Ohio, thought about it for a long time before answering. He wasn't angry, the man said finally. That's what I remember most. I expected anger. What he was instead was disappointed. And somehow that was worse. He paused. He looked at us like we had failed something that mattered. Not him, something bigger than him. And he was right. We had. MacArthur returned to his headquarters that afternoon. He had a full schedule, briefings, command decisions, the grinding logistics of a Pacific campaign that would last 2 more years. Before the next briefing began, he took out Private Cole's letter one more time, read the last sentence, and placed it in the top drawer of his desk. He kept it there for the rest of the New Guinea campaign, not as a reminder of what had gone wrong, as a reminder of who he was fighting for.